I still remember the day the movers carried in that frame, gilded, gaudy, heavier than a grudge. They set it down right at our doorstep, as though the woman it depicted deserved a grand entrance into my marriage. The delivery slip had my mother-in-law's looping signature, bold as a brand. No note, no heads up, just her frozen smile, larger than life, staring out from the oil paint like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. My name is Elowen Hart. I'm 32 years old, and until that portrait arrived, I honestly thought I'd figured out how to keep the fragile balance between my husband's loyalty and his mother's suffocating expectations. But that gilded frame opposite our bed? That was her declaration of war. It wasn't always like this. When Aiden and I met 6 years ago in London, I thought I'd finally stepped into my own story, one where I was enough, loved for who I was, no more proving myself to parents who'd spent decades reminding me that I wasn't their golden child. I didn't care that his family was old money. Marble halls, art collections, dusty heirlooms worth more than my entire upbringing. I thought we'd build our own corner of the world. Turns out his mother thought otherwise. We moved into her gift, a townhouse she insisted we accept, the first of many invisible strings. At first I told myself I could live with her hovering. The occasional unannounced visits, her constant suggestions on how to decorate, what to cook for Aiden, how to dress at parties she threw for his work colleagues, those I survived with strained smiles. But this painting was different. It arrived the week after our 3rd anniversary. I'd spent the morning scrubbing the kitchen counters and humming to myself, planning a surprise dinner for Aiden. I wanted to show him I still cared, that the spark was alive even if the shadows of his mother's demands lingered at every corner. Then the doorbell rang, and the men in blue coveralls shoved my plans aside with one massive crate. I didn't open it right away. For 3 hours I sat on the floor beside that box, tracing the edges with my fingertip like a fool trying to read tea leaves through wood. Aiden came home before I could work up the nerve. I'll never forget how his eyes widened, how quickly they darted away from mine when he saw the gilded edge peeking through the packaging. "It's her gift," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "She said she wanted us to have a piece of her presence here." "A piece?" I laughed, a raw, brittle sound. "Aiden, it's half the wall." He wouldn't meet my gaze. I knew what he was thinking. Her money kept our mortgage-free life afloat. He'd argue that we should be grateful, that a painting was just paint and canvas. But he didn't sleep on my side of the bed, the side facing that smug smile. The first night it hung there, I lay awake for hours. It didn't matter how many times I turned my pillow or shifted under the duvet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like her heels tapping down the hallway. Every whisper of wind against the window felt like her breath, reminding me who really owned this house. I tried to talk to Aiden about moving it, about placing it somewhere else. Anywhere else. He promised he'd think about it. But days turned to weeks, and the portrait stayed, its gilded edges catching the early morning light like a crown. Each sunrise brought that painted stare crashing into my fragile sense of peace. It's funny how people say objects can't hold power over you. They've never had a mother-in-law like mine. Every argument Aiden and I had after that seemed to echo back to that frame. Money, control, independence. His voice rising, mine breaking, both of us standing our ground until silence swallowed our bedroom whole. Then came the rumors. Her whispers at family dinners about how I was struggling to contribute, how I'd failed to give her the grandchild she so desperately wanted. I could feel her eyes on my belly every time I passed her in the hallway, her hand resting on my shoulder just a second too long, a reminder that my worth was tied to something I couldn't produce on command. One evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror, me on one side, her portrait looming behind me. I didn't recognize myself. My face looked tired, edges dulled by the constant push and pull of trying to be enough for a man who couldn't cut the umbilical cord that bound him to his mother. I started staying late at work. My tiny flower shop, my pride. The place where I was Elowen, the business owner, not Elowen, the disappointment. I'd come home past midnight, shoes in hand, the smell of fresh blooms clinging to my hair. Sometimes I'd find Aiden asleep on the couch, the TV flickering. Other nights he'd be awake, waiting to ask why I wasn't trying harder to fit in. Last night changed everything. It was almost 3 a.m. when I tiptoed into our bedroom. The room was cold, The window cracked open just enough to let in the London drizzle. I stood there for a long moment, watching Aiden's chest rise and fall. Then I looked at her, painted eyes glittering with secrets I could almost hear if I leaned in close enough. Something in me snapped. I don't remember picking up the step stool or unhooking the gilded frame. I just remember the sound, the thud as it hit the floor, the glass splintering like a scream trapped in oil and canvas. Aiden shot up in bed, his eyes wide. "What the hell are you doing?" I stood over the shattered portrait, chest heaving, taking my bedroom back. His silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if he'll choose me or the ghost of his mother's approval. But I do know this. No one gets to hang themselves over my marriage and call it love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The crack in the wall was the first thing I noticed when I woke up. Morning sunlight slipped through the curtains and hit the gouge where the edge of the portrait's frame had slammed against the plaster. A jagged reminder that things don't shatter cleanly. They splinter, fracture, echo long after the impact. Aiden wasn't in bed. His side looked untouched, the sheets still crisp from when he'd flung them back the night before. I pressed my palm into the mattress, half expecting it to be warm. It was cold, just like the air that hummed through the open window. I listened for footsteps, for the kettle clicking on in the kitchen, but all I heard was the slow drip of the bathroom faucet. I sat up, the taste of last night's fight still bitter on my tongue. My hands hurt. Small cuts from the broken glass glittered like confetti across my palms. I flexed my fingers, wincing. A piece of gilded wood lay by the dresser. I kicked it under the bed before it could mock me any longer. Downstairs, the house smelled stale, like leftover arguments and cold toast. I found Aiden in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, his elbows on his knees. He didn't look up when I came in. The silence between us felt like a third person in the room. "I called her," he said finally, voice raw. "I told her what you did." My laugh was sharp, hollow. "Of course you did." He flinched, then rubbed his eyes like he could scrub the truth away. "She wants to come by today." "Of course she does," I repeated, my voice dropping. "Let me guess. She wants to hang it back up?" Aiden looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes were red-rimmed, the way they always got when he was torn between two loyalties. "Eloin, you could have just talked to me." I wanted to scream. "I did, Aiden, for weeks, months. You just didn't want to hear me." He stood pacing in small circles like a caged animal. "She helped us get this house. She's controlling you." I snapped. "She's here even when she's not. Her portrait was the last straw." He stopped pacing. "So what now? You think smashing it fixes everything?" I sank into the armchair across from him, my legs suddenly heavy. "No. I think it's just the beginning." The doorbell rang before he could answer. I didn't have to look through the peephole. I knew that knock, that impatient rhythm. Margaret Hart, my mother-in-law, never waited for permission to enter. Aiden opened the door, and there she was. A vision in expensive tweed, her silver hair coiled in a bun so tight it looked like it might snap. Her eyes flicked from the broken frame leaning against the wall to me, sitting barefoot in my threadbare robe. "I see you've been redecorating," she said, her lips curling at the edges. "Good morning, Margaret," I said, forcing my voice steady. She stepped inside like she owned every inch of floorboard. Her perfume, roses and something sharper underneath, hit me like a slap. She walked straight past Aiden and lifted the ruined portrait with 2 fingers, as if it might stain her. "Do you know how much this cost?" she asked, her voice dripping sugar. "Too much," I shot back. "But it cost me more." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Aiden, dear, would you mind giving us a moment?" Aiden hesitated. His eyes flicked to me, an unspoken plea. I looked away. "Go," I said. "It's fine." When the door clicked shut behind him, Margaret's smile vanished. She set the frame down with a thud that made the whole coffee table rattle. "You think you've won something," she said, voice like silk pulled taut. "You think this makes you powerful?" I folded my arms over my chest, ignoring the sting of glass cuts. I think it makes me free. Her laugh was soft, pitying. Oh, darling, you'll never be free. Not while you live under this roof. I met her gaze, refusing to flinch. Then maybe it's time we found our own roof. She clicked her tongue. And how do you plan to afford that? Your little flower shop? You've always been a dreamer, Elowen. Dreamers starve. Her words sliced through me, dredging up every late-night fear I'd buried beneath spreadsheets and stubborn hope. You don't get to talk about my business. You don't get to sit in my living room and act like you built any of this. Margaret leaned in, her perfume wrapping around me like a noose. Everything you have is because of me. The house, the car, the reputation. Without me, you're... enough. My voice cracked like a whip. Without you, I'm still a low in heart. And that's enough. She drew back, eyes narrowing. If you walk away from this family's support, don't come crawling back when you fail. I wanted to scream that I'd been crawling for years, over shards of my pride, over her barbed compliments, over the endless reminders that I'd never quite measure up. But instead, I just stood up. I won't, I said. Watch me. The front door slammed so hard behind her that the broken frame toppled over again, glass crunching underfoot. I sank to my knees, the adrenaline gone, replaced by a cold certainty that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet see. Aiden came back in, his face pale. What did you tell her? I looked at him, my husband, the man I still loved, even if he didn't always know how to fight for me. I told her the truth. He sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. And now? I turned my head to the empty wall where her portrait used to loom. Now we see what happens when you stop letting someone else's ghost haunt your marriage. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Margaret wouldn't let go that easily. And neither would I. This was my house. My marriage. My life. And I was finally ready to fight for it. The afternoon after Margaret slammed the door behind her stretched on like wet laundry in a cold wind. Heavy, slow, never quite drying. Aiden and I drifted around each other, both pretending to find things to do. He sat at the dining table with his laptop open but barely touched the keys, and I pretended the garden needed weeding, though every bloom outside my tiny greenhouse was already pristine. I replayed every word I'd said to her, the way my voice had cracked, the look in her eyes that said she'd underestimated me for far too long, and the echo that came after. What now, Elowen? What happens when you tear down the gilded lie but still have to pay for the roof over your head? By dusk, I was so restless I could barely stand still. I was bent over my roses, fingernails black with dirt, when Aiden came out onto the patio. He stood there, watching me in the half-light, and for a second he didn't look like my husband. He looked like the boy I'd first fallen in love with. Lost, half-formed, searching for something he couldn't quite name. Dinner's ready, he said. I wiped my hands on my jeans, fighting the urge to apologize for something I didn't regret. What did you make? Takeout, he said. Your favorite. Thai. We sat at the kitchen table, the broken portrait still propped against the far wall like a corpse nobody wanted to bury. I picked at my noodles, the silence between us thick enough to chew. He started, then stopped. He tried again. I should have listened to you sooner. I set my fork down. It's not about listening, Aiden. It's about believing me. About choosing me. He looked away. She means well? I laughed, sharp and tired. Does she? He didn't answer. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. I thought about the rent I'd never paid, the mortgage I'd never signed, every meal she'd bought, every holiday she'd orchestrated like a queen distributing crumbs to her loyal subjects. What if we sold the house? I said suddenly. The words tumbled out before I could pull them back. Aiden stared at me. What? We could sell it. Use what we make to start fresh. Somewhere small. Somewhere that's just ours. He scrubbed a hand over his face. And what about your shop? It stays, I said fiercely. That's mine. Always. He shook his head. She'll never allow it. It's not up to her, I snapped. God, Aiden, when did you get so afraid of your own mother? He flinched like I'd struck him. You don't know her like I do. No, I said, my voice low. I know her better. Because I see the person she turns you into. Aiden pushed back from the table so hard his chair squealed against the tile. I can't do this tonight. Then when? I demanded. When is it a good time to take our lives back? He didn't answer. He grabbed his keys, and a moment later, the front door slammed. I sat alone in the kitchen, the smell of cold noodles turning my stomach. I could still feel her eyes on me, painted or not. That night I lay awake, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. I imagined Margaret showing up with lawyers, threatening to cut us off completely. I imagined Aiden caving, coming back with apologies that tasted like ash. I imagined myself alone, paying rent on a flat above my shop, falling asleep surrounded by flowers instead of the ghosts of a family that never really wanted me. But somewhere beneath the fear, something steadier pulsed. A quiet certainty. I'd faced worse than her before. I'd survived my own parents' scorn, the way they'd made me feel like a placeholder for the daughter they'd actually wanted. I'd built my shop from nothing, each petal and stem proof that I could grow something beautiful out of dirt. I drifted off sometime before dawn, the house creaking around me like it too was deciding who it really belonged to. I woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee. Not the bitter instant stuff I drank when I was working late. I stumbled downstairs to find Aiden in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, the kettle whistling. I couldn't sleep, he said. We need to talk. I pulled my robe tighter around me. Okay. He poured me a cup, slid it across the counter. His hands were trembling. I called her again. My chest tightened. Aiden? No, listen. He took a deep breath. I told her we're selling the house. The mug slipped through my fingers. Hot coffee splashing across the marble island. You did what? He grabbed a cloth, blotting up the mess. I told her it's our decision, that it's not her place anymore. I leaned against the counter, dizzy. What did she say? He laughed, a short, bitter bark. She said if we do this, we're dead to her. Silence bloomed between us. 1,000 unspoken fears bloomed with it. And what did you say? I whispered. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot but clear in a way I hadn't seen in years. I said, maybe it's time we start living for the living. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. What now? He shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. We talk to an agent, we find a place, we figure it out. We, that word, so simple, felt like a spark in the darkness. We spent the day cleaning, packing up the things that were ours, boxing the things that weren't. I wrapped up the chipped teapot I'd found at a flea market in Paris, the one Margaret had always sneered at because it didn't match her taste. Aiden pulled family photos off the mantel, tucking the ones of just us into a separate pile. Every taped box felt like a tiny rebellion. That evening, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I opened the door and found Margaret standing there again, flanked by a man in a tailored suit I recognized as the family lawyer. I need to speak with my son, she said, her tone icy. He's not here, I lied. Her eyes narrowed. I know you think you've won. But this isn't over, Elowen. It never is. You're right, I said, stepping aside. Because for once, we get to decide how it ends. The lawyer handed me an envelope. Consider this your notice, he said. Mrs. Hart is reclaiming the property. You have 30 days to vacate. Margaret smiled like a viper. Good luck, darling. I shut the door on her face. I stood there for a moment, envelope clutched in my hand. Then I laughed, a sound that startled me with how free it felt. Bring it on, I whispered. Bring every last bit of it on, because sometimes you have to burn the house down before you can build something worth living in. The envelope weighed nothing in my hand, but it felt like a boulder pressed against my chest as I stared at our reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair was mussed, my robe clung to my shoulders, and in the glass I saw the framed painting's empty spot on the wall, a blankness that seemed to mock the mess we'd unleashed. 30 days. 30 days to dismantle the fortress Margaret had built around us, brick by gilded brick. 30 days to find somewhere new to sleep, to move every cracked cup and thrift store plate that made up our life. 30 days to prove to myself that the woman staring back at me could do this. When Aiden returned, the sun was setting behind him, smearing the sky in bruised pink and purple. He carried takeout again, this time Indian, and his eyes flicked to the envelope I'd left on the coffee table. He didn't ask. He knew. "She really did it," he said, voice low. He set the bag down and leaned against the counter like his legs couldn't hold him. "Of course she did," I said. "Did you expect anything else?" He rubbed his temples. "It's her house, Elowen, legally." "No," I shot back. "It's her investment. It was our home. There's a difference." He flinched at my tone, and guilt rose in my throat like bile. I reached for him, resting my hand on his forearm. "I'm sorry, I'm just so damn tired." He covered my hand with his, and for a moment we just stood there, the room around us smaller than ever. "We'll figure it out," he said. "I promise." Promises are fragile things. I wanted to believe him. I really did. That night, after the curry went cold on our plates, we sat cross-legged on the living room floor with our laptops open, searching listings. Flats too small for his suits and my flower shop's overflow. Townhouses that would swallow every penny we'd managed to save. Rooms in neighborhoods that made me grip my cup a little tighter. At midnight, Aiden shut his laptop with a sigh. "It's hopeless." "It's not," I said, though a small part of me wondered if he was right. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something new in his eyes, fear that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be here to hold this together much longer. What if we can't find something in time? I lifted my chin. "Then we stay in the shop." He barked a humorless laugh. "Your shop?" "Elowen. It's one room and a storage closet." "Then we make do," I said. "People sleep in worse places every night." He didn't argue. He didn't have to. We both knew Margaret had spent years making sure that without her money, we had no cushion to land on. When he fell asleep, I stayed up, staring at the wall where her portrait had hung. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but sleep felt like surrender. So I did what I always did when the darkness threatened to swallow me whole. I made lists. In the notebook I kept in the drawer by my side of the bed, I wrote, "Find temporary storage for shop overflow. Ask Amelia about spare room. Talk to bank about emergency loan. Call agent about selling what we can. Stay. Or go." The last line I crossed out before I even finished writing it. I would stay. Even if it killed me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. I squinted at the screen. Amelia, my oldest friend and the only person in this city who knew every secret Margaret had used against me. "You up?" her text read. I called her instead. Her voice was warm, a blanket against the coldness of my empty house. "I saw the sign in your window," she said without preamble. "Sign?" "The closed for restock sign." "Elowen, what's going on?" My heart twisted. I hadn't been to the shop in 2 days. I'd left Jamie, my part-timer, in charge. The sign meant he'd probably panicked about the low stock and didn't know what else to do. "It's nothing," I lied. "Just life." "Don't just life me," she snapped. "Do you need help?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I don't know." Amelia let out a long breath. "My spare room's still empty. You and Aiden. I can't drag you into this." "You're not dragging me," she said. "I'm jumping in. Big difference." The tears came then, hot and fast. "I can't pay you rent." "I don't want rent. I want you safe." Safe. A word I hadn't let myself believe in for weeks. "Let me talk to Aiden," I said. "I'll call you tonight." When I hung up, I found Aiden sitting on the edge of our bed, his phone dangling from his fingertips. "Your mother called again," I said. He shook his head. No. I called her. My stomach dropped. Why? To tell her we're moving out sooner, he said. To tell her she doesn't have to evict us. I wanted to scream. You're giving her exactly what she wants. No, he said, his voice so soft it almost broke me. I'm giving you what you need. I sat beside him, our shoulders touching, two bodies braced against the hurricane she'd sent our way. Then promise me you won't go back. Not for money, not for help, not for anything. He nodded, eyes on the floor. I promise. We spent the next 2 weeks boxing up our life. Margaret never came by again. She didn't have to. Her lawyer did, dropping off forms and thinly veiled threats about, quote, damage to the property. I signed every paper with shaking hands, each stroke of the pen another cut across my pride. But every box we carried down the steps felt like a victory. Every old teacup, every bent fork, every mismatched pillow was ours. And when you've lived under someone's thumb for so long, even the ugliest lamp becomes a treasure because you chose to keep it. Our last night in that house, we slept on the floor of the living room. The bed was gone, the curtains pulled down. The blank spot on the wall where her portrait had hung stared at us like an accusation. Aiden curled around me. Are you scared? Terrified, I said, but I'd rather be terrified than trapped. In the darkness, he pressed his forehead to mine. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I kissed him, tasting our shared fear, our shared hope. Now you do. That's what matters. When we woke, we left the keys on the counter and walked out together, the door clicking shut behind us like the final note in a song we were done singing. Margaret could keep her house. Her painted face could haunt those walls alone. We had each other. We had a borrowed room at Amelia's. We had my shop and a plan, however fragile. Sometimes freedom doesn't come with fanfare or victory speeches. Sometimes it comes with cardboard boxes and a friend's spare bed, and the quiet knowledge that you chose yourself. I didn't look back. Amelia's spare room was no bigger than my old flower shop's back closet, but it smelled like lavender and hope, and for the first time in years I fell asleep without her painted eyes watching me. The window overlooked the alley behind Amelia's row house in East London, a tangle of overgrown ivy, bins waiting for collection, and a single, stubborn rose bush pushing its way through the cracks in the brick wall. I loved that rose. I told myself if it could bloom here, so could I. Aiden was quieter in those first days. He worked from Amelia's dining table by day and our borrowed mattress by night, tapping out emails to clients who pretended not to notice the new address in his signature. He never said it aloud, but I could see the question in his eyes every time our shoulders brushed. Would I forgive him for all the years I'd spent under Margaret's thumb? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself into the shop. I unlocked the front door before dawn, letting the smell of fresh lilies and peonies push out the stale air that clung to my clothes. I stayed past closing, pruning stems, rewriting orders, stitching together a future with my own 2 hands. The first real test came one rainy Thursday afternoon. I was at the counter, wrestling with the books, when the bell above the door tinkled. Margaret's perfume hit me before I saw her, a sickly sweet mix of roses and something colder. She stood there in her tailored coat, her umbrella dripping onto my welcome mat. Charming, she said, glancing around the cramped shop like it offended her senses. I forced my hands to stay still on the counter. What do you want, Margaret? To talk, she said. You never answered my calls. I laughed, a short, sharp bark that startled an elderly customer near the daisies. Why would I? So you could rub it in? She stepped closer, careful not to let her heels touch the scattered petals on the floor. I did what I had to do to protect my son. I leaned forward, voice low so the customer wouldn't hear. No. You did what you always do, control what you think you own. Margaret sniffed, her eyes narrowing. This place. It's not enough, Elowen. You think you can build a life here? In this hole in the wall? I straightened my spine, felt the cut on my palm from that night so long ago pulse beneath my skin. I already have. She reached into her handbag, pulling out a slim envelope. I'm willing to offer you a settlement, enough to move into a proper house, to start again, cleanly. And the catch? I asked, though I didn't need to. You leave Aiden, she said, her voice as soft as silk and twice as strangling. He can come back home, where he belongs. I stared at the envelope like it might sprout fangs and bite me. You really think money fixes this? She tilted her head. Money fixes everything. I stepped around the counter, closing the distance between us. You're right. It fixes everything you break. But you can't buy me, Margaret. Not anymore. Her mouth twitched. He'll come back to me eventually. You know that. I reached behind her and opened the shop door wide, letting the cold rain rush in. Not if I remind him who he is without you. She didn't move at first. Then she dropped the envelope on the counter, her nails tapping once against the glass as if to say, think about it. She stepped out into the rain without looking back. I stood there, the envelope like a rotting apple between us, until Amelia came in behind me. She picked it up, sniffed. Bribe? Bribe, I said. Amelia smirked. Tea? We drank it in the back room, our knees bumping under the tiny table. Outside, the rose bush trembled under the downpour, but didn't break. Later that night, back at her flat, I found Aiden on the floor with the laptop open, spreadsheets scattered like fallen leaves. He looked up, eyes hollow. She came to see me too. I sank down beside him, tucking my feet under his leg. What did she say? The same thing she told you, I imagine. That I'd be better off. That you'd drag me down. His voice cracked. Do you believe her? I traced the edge of his jaw with my thumb. No. But do you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was the echo of a lifetime of strings she'd wrapped around him. We sat there until the sun came up, neither of us sleeping, our dreams stitched together by fear and stubbornness. When the first rays of light touched the floorboards, I took his hand in mine. We can't let her win, I whispered. He nodded, his throat working around words he couldn't say. We won't. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The next week, I called every vendor I knew. I offered discounts on wedding bouquets, partnered with a local cafe to run a pop-up. I spent nights bent over invoices until my eyes blurred, trying to stretch every pound into two. Amelia's living room became our boardroom. We pinned notes to her walls, budget projections next to sketches of tiny flats we might one day afford. Aiden picked up extra freelance work, his eyes red from late nights and early meetings. We slept when we could, curled around each other like question marks that might one day turn into answers. Then, one evening, as I was locking up the shop, I saw her. Margaret. Across the street, standing by a black town car, her face hidden behind an umbrella. Watching. Waiting. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge her. I locked my door, turned the sign to closed, and walked straight into the rain. I didn't look back. Let her stand there, cloaked in money and malice. Let her watch me bloom in the cracks she left behind. Because this time, the portrait in the gilded frame didn't own me. I owned me. And that was enough. For now. The drizzle clung to my hair as I walked away from Margaret's silhouette on the other side of the street. I didn't run. I didn't need to. Each step felt like it weighed a ton, but it carried a promise too. I would not bend. Not now. Not again. When I got back to Amelia's flat, the kitchen smelled like rosemary bread and hope. Aiden stood by the stove, stirring soup in a pot that wasn't ours, using spoons we'd borrowed, just like this borrowed life. He turned when he heard the door. He looked so young then, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, hair damp from the mist seeping through the cracked window. Did you see her? He asked quietly. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter too loud in the tiny space. She was across the street from the shop, just standing there, watching. His shoulders sank. She's not going to stop. No, I said. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his waist. He smelled like fresh herbs and the cheap soap Amelia stocked in the guest bathroom. But neither am I. He buried his face in my neck. For a heartbeat, we let the rain and the threats and the uncertainty melt away. We stood like that until the soup bubbled over, hissing against the stove. We ate at Amelia's tiny table. She sat with us, her legs curled under her like a cat's, her eyes darting between us as if she could hold our fragile hope together, just by watching. "So what now?" Amelia asked when the plates were empty. "Now," I said, "we build something she can't tear down." Amelia smirked. "A fortress? A life?" I said. "A real one. Brick by brick. No more borrowed houses or gilded frames." Aiden's fingers found mine under the table. For the first time, he didn't flinch when I squeezed too tight. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of small victories and bigger fears. The shop kept me sane. I started selling terrariums. Tiny glass gardens that people bought faster than I could make them. Couples came in for bouquets. Students bought single stems wrapped in brown paper. I made just enough to cover the boxes we still hadn't unpacked at Amelia's. At night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft tick of Amelia's old clock in the hallway. Some nights, Aiden turned toward me, his voice ragged in the dark. "Do you think we'll ever get past this?" "I don't know," I whispered back. "But we're trying. That's more than we did before." One morning, just as dawn turned the city pink, my phone buzzed. Aiden stirred beside me, grumbling at the noise. I squinted at the screen. An email from a property agent I'd messaged weeks ago. Cheap listings, tiny spaces, places no one else wanted. This one was different. A flat above an old tailor shop, 2 blocks from mine. Small, yes, cracked paint on the door. But it had tall windows and crooked wooden floors. I could see it already. A place that smelled like bread and flowers, not like someone else's expectations. When Aiden woke, I shoved the phone at him. "Look." He blinked at the screen, hair sticking up in every direction. "Elle, it's tiny." "It's ours," I said. "If we want it." He didn't answer right away. He looked at me instead. Really looked, the way he hadn't when that portrait still hung over our bed. "You really think we can make this work?" "Do you?" I asked. He brushed my hair behind my ear. "Yeah," he said. "I do." We signed the papers that Friday. Amelia stood between us at the solicitor's office, bouncing on her toes like a proud big sister. The flat wasn't much, but when we turned the key for the first time, it felt like crossing a threshold into a story no one could rewrite for us. We spent the first night on a borrowed air mattress. The walls were bare. The radiator rattled like a ghost in the corner. But when I lay beside him, I didn't see Margaret's painted eyes anymore. I saw my own reflection in the window. Messy hair, tired eyes, a grin I hadn't worn in years. The next day I hung a dried flower wreath on the front door. Not a gilded frame, not a portrait, just something small and fragile that I'd made with my own hands. A week later, the calls started again. Margaret's voice leaked through the crackling line, a snake hissing from the shadows. "I hear you've moved in above a tailor's shop." "How quaint. Does it come with rodents?" I didn't answer. I let her rant, her words bouncing off me like hail on a tin roof. When she paused to catch her breath, I said, "This is the last time we talk like this, Margaret. You don't get to live here. Not anymore. You think you can erase me?" she snapped. "I don't have to," I said. "You've done it yourself." I hung up before she could spit more poison. Aiden was waiting in the doorway. He'd heard enough to know. "She won't stop," he said. "Neither will we," I said. I stepped into his arms, feeling the heartbeat that matched mine. And for the first time, the space behind my eyelids wasn't filled with gilded edges. It was filled with light. I wish I could say the calls stopped after that. I wish I could say Margaret drifted back into her world of dinner parties and charity auctions, her claws withdrawn now that we'd slipped through them. But people like her don't know how to let go. They know how to wait, to watch for the soft spots in your armor. 2 weeks after we moved in, a letter arrived, tucked into the rusted letterbox that squeaked every time it swung open. It wasn't the usual legal envelope. No heavy cream paper with embossed letterhead, just plain white, no return address. Inside, one line. Do you really think he'll choose you forever? I crumpled it into my fist before Aiden could see. I stood at our tiny kitchen sink, staring down at the drain while the tap dripped like a ticking clock. The question echoed through me, as sharp and familiar as the crack in the plaster above our bed. Do you? I didn't throw the letter away. I hid it behind the old tins of flour Amelia had given us as a housewarming gift. I told myself I'd keep it as proof, in case she tried to claim it wasn't her. But deep down, I knew. Margaret might never scrawl her name on an envelope again, but her fingerprints were all over every word. The next day, I poured myself into the shop. I stayed late, stringing fairy lights across the front window so the bouquets glowed warm against the dark. I let the work drown out the whispering in my head. When I came home that night, Aiden was waiting by the stairs. His coat was half-buttoned, his hair damp with drizzle. "Ilawen," he said, voice soft as a bruise. I talked to her. Something inside me shriveled. Why? She called, he said. I didn't pick up at first, but she left a message, said she wants to meet. Just once. I turned away, shoulders rigid. So go, but don't come back with her words dripping off you. Come with me, he said. I laughed, bitter and small. No. We slept facing opposite walls that night, his breath against my spine, warm and distant all at once. 2 days later, he met her at a cafe in South Kensington. He came home smelling like her perfume, a hint of roses, sharpened with something metallic. I didn't ask what they talked about. I didn't have to. The shadows in his eyes told me enough. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with my eyes like I could read my future in the plaster. I could hear the echo of her question. Do you really think he'll choose you forever? At dawn, I slipped out of bed, pulled on my boots, and walked to the shop. The streets were empty. The city not quite awake. I stood behind the counter, the cold from the floor seeping into my bones, and I let the silence wrap around me. I thought about who I'd been when I met him. A girl with dirt under her nails, dreams too big for her tiny rented flat. A girl who'd thought marrying into old money would mean safety, not surrender. A girl who'd let herself become so small under that portrait's painted gaze that she'd almost forgotten how to breathe. The bell above the door jingled. I jumped. Amelia stepped in, her hair tucked under a wool cap, a paper bag of croissants in her hand. You look like hell, she said, voice gentle. Thanks, I croaked. She set the bag down, tearing it open. The buttery smell filled the room, warm and kind. You've been here all night? I nodded. She didn't ask why. Did you know, she said between bites, that when I moved here from Bristol, I slept on a pub's backroom floor for a month? I stared at her, thrown off. What? She grinned. Yeah, I worked behind the bar. They didn't have a staff flat, so I curled up behind the beer kegs with my coat for a blanket. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because, she said, leaning forward, you forget how strong you are. You forget you've done harder things than this. And you didn't have anyone then. Now you have me, and him if you let him try. I swallowed the lump in my throat. He went to see her. I know, she said. I also know he came home to you. The door jangled again. Aiden stood in the doorway, hair damp, shoulders hunched like he'd been standing there for hours before finding the courage to push through. I'll leave you two to it, Amelia said, squeezing my hand before slipping out into the dawn. Aiden stepped closer. His eyes were red, his hands jammed into his pockets. I told her to stay away, for good this time. I folded my arms over my chest. And did she listen? He laughed, a hollow sound. No, but I did. I looked up, really looked, and for the first time in weeks I saw him, not Margaret's son, but my husband. Flawed. Trying. Terrified. Why do you stay? I whispered. His breath shuddered out of him. Because you're the only thing that's ever been real. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, the same one I'd hidden behind the flour tins. He held it out to me. I found this. I know who sent it. And I know who I'm choosing. The paper trembled between us. Rain pattered against the window, soft and steady. "Then choose me every day," I said, my voice breaking. "Not just when she's gone, not just when it's easy." He nodded, eyes shining. "Every day." We stood there in the half-light, two people who'd burned a gilded cage to the ground and were learning, brick by stubborn brick, how to build something honest in its ashes. We stood like that for what felt like an hour, the rain tapping at the windows of the shop, the city beyond waking up in slow motion. Aiden's hand hovered between us, the envelope crumpled and damp from his palm. I didn't take it. I didn't have to. We both knew what it said, and more importantly, what it didn't. His mother's poison didn't need a signature. Her words carried her fingerprints all the same. He dropped the envelope onto the counter, his eyes never leaving mine. "I should have seen it sooner," he said, "how she makes everything feel like a choice between her and you." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "She's good at that." He laughed, but it came out sharp and tired. "She's the best." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to mine. "But I'm done playing her game, Elowen. Done letting her hang over us like that painting." My lips twitched. At least the painting stayed on the wall. His laughter turned real then, deep and rough around the edges. He pulled back just enough to see my face. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said. "Just don't let her back in. Ever." He nodded once, like he was carving the promise into stone. "Never." We spent that morning side by side in the shop. I showed him how to trim the stems of the lilies without bruising them. He messed it up the first few times, cutting them too short or crushing the tips. But his smile was so open, so real, I didn't care about the wasted flowers. When the lunch rush came and went, he left to meet a new client. I stayed behind, sweeping petals from the floor, watching the clock tick toward closing. Every creak of the door made my pulse jump. Every shadow across the window made me wonder if Margaret would try one more time. But she didn't come, not that day, not the next. Instead, she called Amelia. I found out when Amelia stormed into the shop 2 days later, her cheeks pink with rage. She dropped her bag on the counter so hard a glass vase rattled off the edge and smashed on the floor. "Hey!" I yelped, darting around to pick up the shards. "Leave it," Amelia snapped. She grabbed my shoulders. "She called me, Elowen, your mother-in-law, tried to buy me off. Said she'd help me open a second cafe if I convinced you to walk away." I stared at her, the blood rushing in my ears. "She did what?" "I told her where she could shove her charity," Amelia said. Her hands were shaking. "But she's not stopping, Elle. She won't." I sank onto a stool behind the counter. What did she say exactly? Amelia paced, her boots squeaking on the wet floor. "She said you're wasting Aiden's potential. That he'll never be the man he should be with you dragging him down. That you're small-time and petty, and she won't stand by while you ruin him." I laughed, short, bitter. That's her entire playbook. "It's more than that now," Amelia said. "She's poking at everyone around you. Clients, vendors. She called your wholesaler, Elle. Asked if they knew about your financial troubles." My mouth went dry. "She's trying to isolate me." "Exactly," Amelia said. She grabbed my hand, squeezing until my knuckles ached. "You have to hit back." "How?" I whispered. "She has money, power, connections." "So what?" Amelia hissed. "You have truth. You have this place. You have people who love you." She jabbed a finger toward my chest. "And you have a spine she never counted on." Her words sank deep, rooting in the places that still felt fragile. "I won't lose him," I said. "I won't lose myself." "Then make her see you can't be bought," Amelia said. "Make her regret underestimating you." When Amelia left, I sat alone in the shop, the broken vase pieces still glittering on the floor like ice. I replayed every moment that had led me here, the day the portrait arrived, the day I smashed it, the day we walked out of her house for the last time. I was tired, but I wasn't finished. That night, Aiden came home late. He found me at the kitchen table, a notepad covered in scribbles. "What's this?" he asked. "My plan," I said. "Our plan." He slid into the chair beside me, eyes flicking over the page. "Tell me." I pointed to each line, my finger trembling but sure. We find new suppliers, ones she can't reach. We launch online orders so she can't scare off our local clients. We do workshops, flower arranging, seasonal wreaths, get people in the door, make the shop more than a shop. Aiden looked at me like I'd just cracked the code to the universe. You think this will stop her? No, I said, but it makes her irrelevant. If she can't control us, she can't hurt us. His grin broke across his face like dawn. Let's do it. The next morning, I posted flyers in every cafe, library, and community board within 10 blocks. Hearts blossoms, learn, create, bloom. Workshops for kids, for couples, for the lonely souls who needed flowers more than they knew. I filmed videos for social media, my shaky voice narrating how to keep hydrangeas fresh, how to wrap tulips in brown paper with twine. Orders trickled in, slow but steady. Amelia spread the word through her cafe regulars. Aiden's old clients booked floral subscriptions for their offices. Every pound we made felt like a brick laid on the foundation of a house no portrait could ever haunt again. One rainy Friday, I came home to find Aiden sitting on the floor of our tiny flat, surrounded by open boxes, old photos, letters, wedding cards yellowed at the edges. "What's this?" I asked. He held up a photo, us on our wedding day, me laughing so hard my veil had slipped sideways. "I want to remember this," he said, not her voice in my head, not her threats, just U.S. I knelt beside him, taking the photo in my hands. "Then let's build a wall with these. Not her frame, not her face, just us." We taped photos above the bed, memories like shields, reminders of every time we'd chosen each other over the ghosts that tried to claim us. When we were done, we lay side by side under our paper fortress. Rain tapped at the window, steady as a heartbeat. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we start again." "No," I said, pressing my palm to his chest. "We've already started." And for the first time, I believed it. When dawn slipped through the curtains of our tiny flat, it fell across our wall of memories, photos taped crooked, edges curling in the damp air. I lay there, tracing each one with my eyes. The day we signed our first lease, our honeymoon in a half-broken seaside cottage. Aiden holding me up outside the hospital when I'd fainted from exhaustion during the shop's first Christmas rush. None of them had Margaret's shadow in the background. None of them belonged to her. Aiden stirred beside me, blinking at the makeshift gallery. "It's ugly," he said, voice rough with sleep. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. We got up before the city did, slipping out into the cold with coffee in paper cups and fingers laced together. At the shop, Amelia was already there, propped on a step stool hanging fresh signs in the window. Workshops open. Subscription bouquets now available. Each handwritten letter felt like a spell against the ghosts, still clawing at the edges of our peace. "I'm putting you on my cafe's loyalty cards," Amelia said, tapping the glass with her knuckle. "Buy 5 coffees, get a stem free. Guilt them into buying a bouquet for Mum." "You're a genius," I said. She shot me a grin over her shoulder. "And don't you forget it." I spent the morning teaching a group of children how to twist roses into crowns. Their laughter bounced off the old walls, louder than the echoes of all the nights I'd sat here counting pennies and wondering if I'd survive another month. When the parents came to pick them up, one mother slipped an envelope into my hand. "I don't know what you've heard," she said, voice low, "but your mother-in-law called me, said this place was unstable, said you were unstable." My smile didn't falter. "And yet you're here." The woman smiled back, tight but real. "Because I don't trust rich women who speak like queens. I trust women who let my daughter play with flowers while I sit next door and remember how to breathe." When she left, I unfolded the envelope. It held 20 pounds and a card. For more crowns and more breathing. I slipped the note into the tin where I kept Amelia's first pound coin. Proof that sometimes faith grows in the cracks left by cruelty. Later that week, Aiden came home carrying bags of groceries he'd picked up after a late client meeting. He kicked the door shut behind him, his grin wide. "Guess what?" I peered at him over the stove. "What?" I landed the Darlington account. They want regular arrangements. Twice a week, high-end. They saw the videos. I nearly dropped my wooden spoon. "Seriously?" He crossed the kitchen, setting the bags on the counter. Seriously, they love the, quote, local family-run story. They want you to come in and teach their team how to keep the flowers alive longer. I laughed, the sound so unfamiliar it made him laugh too. Look at us, I said, wiping tears from my cheeks, running a business like grown-ups. Hey, he said, leaning in to kiss my temple, I've always been grown up. You let your mother hang her face over our bed, I said, swatting him with a dish towel. Grown up, my ass. He caught my wrist, his grin fading to something softer. I love you, Elle. I know, I said. Now set the table before the pasta turns to mush. But it wasn't all bouquets and laughter. Margaret found new cracks to slip through. Anonymous reviews started appearing online. Dead flowers. Overpriced. Owner unstable. I knew her voice in every word. At first they hurt, but then Amelia posted a picture of me behind the counter, flowers stuffed in every pocket of my apron, hair wild, grin wide, the caption reading, "Come see how unstable we really are." The post went viral. Orders doubled overnight. One night I came home late to find a note taped to our door. No signature, just block letters. You think you've won. Aiden found me on the floor inside, back against the door, the note crumpled in my fist. He sank down beside me, his shoulder warm against mine. We have won, he said. I looked at him, this man who'd once flinched every time his mother's name was mentioned. She'll never stop. Then we won't either, he said. Promise me, Elle, promise you won't run. Never again, I said, the words tasting like steel on my tongue. He pressed his forehead to mine. Then she can't beat us. When I opened the shop the next morning, someone had slipped another envelope under the door. Inside was a photo. Margaret at some garden party, draped in pearls, surrounded by people who pretended her smile wasn't a blade. Taped to the back, one line, "This is your future if you stay." I set the photo in the center of the work table, surrounded it with fresh-cut blooms. Roses, peonies, tulips. Anything soft, anything stubborn enough to bloom even when the frost clung to its petals. Then I took the scissors and sliced the photo in half, then quarters, then again until it was confetti. When Aiden came in that afternoon, he found me sweeping the scraps into a bin. Good, he said, nodding once. She doesn't live here. Not anymore, I said. He took my face in his hands, thumbs brushing my cheeks. We do. That night we lay beneath our crooked paper fortress of photos, the rain hammering the roof, the city humming below. Aiden's fingers traced circles on my hip. Do you ever miss it? The house? I snorted. I miss the bathtub. He laughed, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. We'll get another one someday. One without her name on the deed, I said. He fell quiet then, his breath warm on my skin. Do you think she'll ever stop? I stared at the ceiling. No, but I don't need her to. His arm tightened around me. Me neither. And for once, the only portrait above our bed was the one we'd made ourselves. Crooked, unframed, imperfect. Ours. Some nights, the rain felt like forgiveness. Other nights, it was a reminder that old ghosts don't stay buried just because you wish them gone. A week after I shredded Margaret's latest threat, I woke to the smell of lilies. Sharp, fresh, out of place. I sat up in the half-dark, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Aiden stirred beside me. What is it? He mumbled. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Stay here. I found them in the hallway. 2 perfect white lilies in a crystal vase, perched on the windowsill like a curse. No note. No card. Just her scent, so familiar it made my teeth ache. When Aiden joined me, he looked at the flowers like they might explode. She won't stop, will she? No, I said, but neither will we. We put the lilies in the rubbish bin, glass and all, the vase shattered at the bottom like a promise undone. At the shop that morning, Amelia met me with news. I have a plan, she said, practically vibrating as she shoved a stack of flyers into my hands. A plan for what? I asked. To make her irrelevant, she said. Community market. Here, Saturday. We invite every small business owner she's ever looked down on. Florists, bakers, artists. Hell, even the buskers. We make it so big that her threats look like a tantrum. I thumbed through the flyers. Bright, simple, inviting. You think people will come? Amelia's grin was sharp as a knife. They already said yes. They're tired of people like her stepping on their necks. We worked late into the night, printing signs, stringing up bunting, sweeping the front walk. Aiden spent hours building makeshift stalls out of pallets we dragged from a local garden center's bin. The city was still draped in drizzle, but the lights from our windows made it look like hope had roots here. On Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon rolls and the sound of laughter in the street below. When I stepped outside, I nearly cried. The entire block was alive, music from a violin drifting down from an open flat window, children weaving between stalls with painted faces, flowers spilling from buckets onto the pavement. Amelia had set up a tiny coffee cart beside the door, handing out paper cups to anyone who paused long enough to listen to our story. "Look at this," she said, handing me a cup. "Look what you did." "You did this," I said, voice thick. "No," she said, "you made us believe we could." By noon, the shop was so packed I could barely hear myself think. People came in clutching tulips, jars of jam, bread still warm from the oven. They asked for wreaths, crowns, anything my hands could make. Every bouquet I wrapped felt like a tiny rebellion. Aiden stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, learning how to tie ribbons with clumsy fingers, and a grin that made my chest ache in the best way. When the sun dipped low, turning the street gold, Margaret arrived. I saw her before she saw me, her hair perfect, her coat spotless despite the damp. She stood at the edge of the market, her eyes sweeping over the chaos like a general surveying a battlefield she couldn't control. She stepped closer. People parted for her without realizing why. Some faces turned away, others stared, curiosity electric in the air. "Elowen," she said, voice smooth as the silk scarf draped over her shoulders. "This is quite the spectacle." "It's a community," I said, "not a spectacle." Her eyes flicked to Aiden behind me. "You could have had so much more." "I do," I said. "I have everything you hate, people who see me, who stand with me." Her lips twitched, that almost smile she used to wield like a knife. "These people won't save you when the bills come due." "They already have," I said, stepping closer so only she could hear. "Every time you try to break us, they remind me what I'm fighting for." She tilted her head, studying me like she still couldn't believe the girl she'd once dismissed was standing here, unbowed. "You think you've won, don't you?" "I know I have," I said, "because I don't need to hang my face over someone else's bed to matter." The crowd swallowed her then, Amelia pulling me back to help a couple pick out peonies, a boy tugging at Aiden's sleeve to ask for a rose for his mom. Margaret stood frozen in the middle of it all, a statue no one cared to admire. When she finally turned and walked away, I didn't follow, I didn't watch. I let her vanish into the rain like a bad dream dissolving with daylight. That night, when the last table was folded, the last bunting taken down, Aiden and I sat on the shop floor, our backs against the cold glass. "She'll come back," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me, that grin so familiar it hurt. "So will we." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Always." In our tiny flat, beneath our wall of crooked photos, I pressed my palm to his chest and felt his heartbeat, a drum louder than the rain, stronger than any ghost. Margaret might haunt every corner she could find, but we'd turned our lives into places she could never live. We didn't need a gilded frame, we had each other. And we were enough. When the sun dipped low, turning the street gold, Margaret arrived. I saw her before she saw me, her hair perfect, her coat spotless despite the damp. She stood at the edge of the market, her eyes sweeping over the chaos like a general surveying a battlefield she couldn't control. She stepped closer. People parted for her without realizing why. Some faces turned away. Others stared, curiosity electric in the air. "Elowen," she said, voice smooth as the silk scarf draped over her shoulders. "This is quite the spectacle." "It's a community," I said, "not a spectacle." Her eyes flicked to Aiden behind me. "You could have had so much more." "I do," I said. "I have everything you hate, people who see me, who stand with me." Her lips twitched, that almost smile she used to wield like a knife. "These people won't save you when the bills come due." They already have, I said, stepping closer so only she could hear. Every time you try to break us, they remind me what I'm fighting for. She tilted her head, studying me like she still couldn't believe the girl she'd once dismissed was standing here, unbowed. You think you've won, don't you? I know I have, I said, because I don't need to hang my face over someone else's bed to matter. The crowd swallowed her then, Emilia pulling me back to help a couple pick out peonies, a boy tugging at Aiden's sleeve to ask for a rose for his mum. Margaret stood frozen in the middle of it all, a statue no one cared to admire. When she finally turned and walked away, I didn't follow, I didn't watch. I let her vanish into the rain, like a bad dream dissolving with daylight. That night, when the last table was folded, the last bunting taken down, Aiden and I sat on the shop floor, our backs against the cold glass. She'll come back, he said. I know, I said. He looked at me, that grin so familiar it hurt. So will we. I leaned my head on his shoulder. Always. In our tiny flat, beneath our wall of crooked photos, I pressed my palm to his chest and felt his heartbeat. A drum louder than the rain, stronger than any ghost. Margaret might haunt every corner she could find, but we'd turned our lives into places she could never live. We didn't need a gilded frame. We had each other. And we were enough. We slept that night like we hadn't in years. No painted eyes on the walls, no footsteps echoing through hallways she'd paid for. Just the soft snore of the city outside our window, the creak of the old radiator, and the warmth of Aiden's chest beneath my palm. Morning came with its usual small demands. I rolled out of bed first, pulled on my thickest jumper, and tiptoed around the boxes still stacked like makeshift furniture. We'd left so much behind in that house, things Margaret had bought to make us grateful, indebted, small. Here, every chipped mug, every creaky chair felt like a battle flag. At the shop I found Emilia propped behind the counter, sleep lines still creasing her cheek. She'd fallen asleep sorting workshop bookings again, a trail of sticky notes fluttering to the floor like confetti. Morning, I said, nudging her with my hip. She cracked one eye open. Coffee first, then we talk about your in-laws. I laughed, short and genuine. Deal. We brewed the coffee, leaning hip to hip behind the counter, while the steam curled around us like an invisible barricade. Outside, the street still wore the glow of yesterday's community market. People peeked through the window, nodding, waving, some even pressing handwritten notes against the glass. Loved the flowers. More wreaths. You're amazing. If I'd let myself, I might have cried. But tears were a luxury I hadn't earned yet. You know, Emilia said, she'll try again. I know, I said. She always does. But you're not the same girl she pushed around. I met her eyes. No, I'm not. That afternoon, Aiden arrived, hair still damp from the drizzle, suit jacket slung over one shoulder. He leaned over the counter to kiss my forehead. Big day. Why? Emilia asked, wiggling her eyebrows. He shot me a conspiratorial grin. I got us a meeting, investors, small business expansion grant. My stomach dropped. Aiden, I don't want her money. Not her, he said quickly. Never her. Local program, real people, real help. Emilia whooped so loud a customer jumped. Yes, look at you two, all legit and unstoppable. My heart thrummed against my ribs. Are we ready for this? Aiden squeezed my hand. You are, we are. We met the grant officer in a cafe Emilia had practically lived in when she first moved to London. The woman wore sensible shoes and carried a battered leather folder, the kind that looked like it had seen 1,000 broken dreams and a handful of miracles. She listened to us talk about the shop, the workshops, the flower subscriptions. She asked hard questions about cash flow, competition, supply chains, and I answered every single one without stuttering. My voice didn't waver once. I knew my numbers. I knew my business. Margaret's echo had no place here. At the end, the officer tucked her pen into her folder and leaned back. You two remind me of my grandparents, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. They ran a corner shop. Everyone said they'd fail, but they never did. Do you know why? Aiden shook his head. Why? Because they knew what they were worth. No one could convince them they were less than that. She pushed a crisp business card across the table. You'll hear from us by the end of the week. When we stepped back onto the street, Aiden grabbed me around the waist and spun me once, right there on the slick pavement. Look at you, he said. Remember when you thought you were just a girl with a few roses? I kissed him, right in the middle of the city that had tried to eat us alive. I'm still that girl. But I know what I'm worth now. He grinned, pressing his forehead to mine. So do I. When we got home, a letter waited inside our door. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive. I knew before I tore it open that it was from her. I read it standing up, back pressed to the door, Aiden watching from the kitchen. What does she want now? He asked. I read the last line aloud. A family that turns its back on its own isn't a family at all. Aiden scoffed. She's never been family. I folded the letter and dropped it into the bin. No, but we are. That night, we rearranged our wall of photos, adding new ones from the market. Amelia's grin behind her coffee stall, a little girl with a daisy crown. Me and Aiden, arms around each other, faces smudged with flour from the free bakery samples. Each photo felt like a spell, proof that we were still here, still standing, still ours. Before bed, I stood at the window, looking out at the alleyway where the rose bush I'd planted was already pushing against the cracked brick. Tiny buds, stubborn against the frost. Aiden slipped his arms around my waist. What are you thinking about? I leaned back into him. Roots! He pressed his lips to my temple. We've got them now. I nodded, resting my hand over his. And she'll never rip them out again. He didn't have to say anything. The warmth of him behind me said enough. And in the glass, our reflection looked nothing like her gilded frame. It looked like us. Flawed, defiant, alive. It felt fitting that our final test didn't come with a bang, but with a knock. A quiet, almost polite rap on the shop door one cold Sunday morning. I was alone, the early sun catching on my hands as I arranged tulips in the front window. I knew it was her before I even turned around. Margaret stood outside, framed by the glass, her face as composed as ever, her lips pulled into that sharp-edged smile that had once made my stomach twist. I could have pretended not to see her. But I didn't. I opened the door. She stepped in like the shop was hers to inspect, her eyes sweeping over the shelves of blooms, the handwritten signs, the creaky floorboards Amelia had promised to help me sand this spring. She paused in front of the photos taped to the wall behind the register. Aiden's grin, Amelia's crooked peace sign, children with petals tangled in their hair. You've done well for yourself, she said finally, her voice as smooth as the silk scarf wound around her throat. I know, I said. I didn't invite her to sit. Didn't offer her tea. She nodded toward the wall. He could have had so much more. I crossed my arms over my chest. He does have more. Her eyes met mine, steel and pride and that deep, coiled anger that I'd come to know so well. He's my son. He's my husband, I shot back. And he's not your puppet anymore. For a moment, the mask cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. I didn't do this to hurt you, Elowen. No. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so the few early customers wouldn't hear. Then why send the lilies? The letters? The threats? Why tell everyone I was unstable? She stiffened. You were tearing him away from his family. No, I said, I was tearing him away from you, and there's a difference. Silence bloomed between us, heavy with every word we'd never said aloud. Outside, a bus rumbled past, rattling the windows. The rosebush in the alley trembled in the breeze. Finally, she reached into her bag, pulling out an envelope. One last offer, she said, for both of you. I didn't take it. No. She frowned. You don't even know what it is. It doesn't matter, I said. We're not for sale. Her fingers tightened around the envelope until it crumpled. You think you've won? I smiled, slow, steady, the way I'd practiced in the mirror when I was still trying to remember who I was without her shadow. I know I have. She looked at me like she wanted to say something more, some final twist of the knife. But whatever it was, she swallowed it. She turned, her coat swishing against the buckets of fresh blooms, and walked out the door. She didn't slam it, she didn't look back. When I locked it behind her, I realized I wasn't shaking. My heart was steady, my hands were steady. The flowers around me seemed to stand a little taller, leaning into the sun. Later that night, Aiden found me at the kitchen table in our flat, sorting receipts into neat piles. He looked tired but peaceful, the way he always did after helping deliver arrangements all over the city. "Was she there?" he asked quietly. "She was," I said. "And she's gone now." He pulled out a chair, sitting beside me. "Did she say anything?" "One last offer," I said. "I didn't take it." He reached over, threading his fingers through mine. "Good." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" "Are you?" he asked. I thought about it, really thought. About the house we'd left, the portrait I'd shattered, the nights I'd spent wondering if I was strong enough to stand my ground. About the whispers, the letters, the poisoned gifts left at our door. About Amelia's grin, the kids with their flower crowns, Aiden's hand, steady in mine through it all. "Yeah," I said, "I am." We sat there until the radiator clanged to life, until the pipes rattled and the night turned deep blue outside our crooked windows. When we finally went to bed, I paused in front of the wall above our headboard. Photos taped up with cheap washi tape. Us. Always us. No gilded frames, no painted eyes. Aiden slipped in behind me, arms wrapping around my waist. "What are you thinking?" I smiled. That she can't hang herself over our marriage ever again. His laugh was muffled against my neck. Damn right. We fell asleep like that, tangled together under the soft hum of the city, our fortress, crooked but ours. And in the morning, when the sun spilled through the windows, it caught the rosebush blooming in the alley, new buds, new thorns, roots pushing deeper every day. We were enough. We'd always be enough. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them, subscribe, and turn on notifications.